Hello and welcome. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns here in Atlanta inside the presidential debate spin room. Welcome to a very special edition of America Decides. Tonight, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump will take the stage here in Atlanta. It's the earliest televised general election debate ever. And we're in the battleground state of Georgia. This is a state that both of these candidates have narrowly won in the past in different years. So far this year, though, it is a toss-up. The question tonight, will the candidates focus on the issues, or will we see a repeat of the last time these two shared a stage during the chaotic debates of 2020? For more on all of this, let's bring in Robert Costa and Nancy Cordes. They are here with me in Atlanta covering this historic debate. Bob, I want to start with you since you're here with me in the spin room. Let's talk about the Trump campaign. What are you hearing? What's your reporting telling you about what their preparations are for tonight and what they expect?
There are pretty low stakes inside the Trump campaign at this moment tonight. There's a belief that former President Trump has the consolidation right now of the Republican Party around him. Now, inside the highest ranks of the Trump campaign, they know that not everyone loves former President Trump. He's not everybody's favorite. There are still some Nikki Haley type voters out there who have reservations about his conduct, reservations about how he handled 2020. But at the end of the day, there's a firm belief on the Trump side that Republican voters are going to support the ticket because they don't support President Biden and his policies. The question tonight for the Biden campaign, I'm told, is can he start to win over at all independent voters, traditional Republicans? Can he start to peel away at that Republican consolidation? Because it is there. But there is a belief in the Democratic Party that in the suburbs of Philadelphia, the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, some of those Republicans who are business-minded might have concerns about how Trump has behaved in the past. They're winnable, and Biden's going to remind them about abortion rights, January 6th, Trump's criminal conviction. And the real battle tonight, though, is going to be over the economy. That's the kitchen table issue. Does Biden have an answer on inflationary pain? And how does former President Trump really make the case on the economy? Is it just about trade and immigration, or can he broaden it? That's what I'm watching tonight.
And Bob, you and I have been covering this presidential race all year. And what's so remarkable about it is the race hasn't shifted. It has been close, 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 especially in those key battleground states. Do you think tonight, given the timing of this debate, that's the earliest that we've seen a presidential debate, can really change the trajectory of this race?
I've been told that former President Trump and President Biden both believe this really matters tonight because all the insiders have been paying attention to the race all year.
Yeah.
But most people are living their normal lives. They're not like us. They're going on vacation. They're dealing with their school year.
What's that like?
Their jobs. Well, we both could use one after this campaign. But they believe that this is an opportunity tonight to reintroduce two candidates who are so well known to a country that seems to be, based on polling, pretty weary about this entire campaign. So both campaigns are trying to present a smile tonight. I'm really watching tonight former President Trump. I'm told he wants to come out low simmer, not be immediately throwing rhetorical punches at President Biden, because he knows he paid a political cost in 2020 by being so aggressive interrupting President Biden, then candidate Biden, that he came across as a bit much. And this is about reintroducing Trump, making him someone who's palatable, someone who's acceptable to voters.
Well, we heard from Trump, and now let's hear from our Nancy Cordes, who is outside the spin room. And I know, Nancy, you've been covering the Biden campaign. They have been preparing vigorously for tonight's debate. Tell us a little bit about those preparations.
Well, Caitlin, one of the things that the Biden team told me today that President Biden has been preparing for is to fact-check Trump, because they believe that Trump is going to tell a lot of lies tonight. And they say that President Biden is going to call him out on it. He's going to mention when he thinks something's untrue. He will point it out. He will say the truth, they say, and then move on. So he knows that he needs to focus on his own record as well. But he's not going to shy away from calling Trump out. Beyond that, they want him tonight to portray Trump as someone who is too dangerous to return to the Oval Office, someone who has promoted political violence within the U.S., who is now a convicted felon, someone who is facing indictment right here in the battleground state of Georgia. So that is going to be something you will likely hear from President Biden tonight, a focus on January 6th. In particular, as they try to make the case that Biden is the safer choice for the next 4 years.
And Nancy, what's at stake for the president tonight? I know that's a big question, and I know these two have debated before, but he is now the incumbent. So a very different environment than 4 years ago.
A couple of big challenges for him. First of all, as Bob pointed out, inflation. He can talk all he wants about the great unemployment rate that the country is experiencing right now, wage growth, et cetera. But the Biden campaign and the White House are well aware that people have really felt the pain from inflation over the past few years and that he can't just ignore it. So I'm told he will acknowledge head on that rising prices have been a problem for Americans. He'll talk about what more he wants to do to address it. But beyond that, the other big challenge for them is that they know that there are a lot of Americans out there who are on the fence solely because they have concerns about his age and his ability to serve for another 4 years. So he needs to have a strong performance tonight to show that he's in command of the facts, to show that he's confident, to show that he is he's just as capable now as he was 4 years ago. And that's tough because in a 90-minute debate, anybody can forget a fact. Anybody can trip over a line. And so, this is just, increasing the stakes for him tonight, even though these are issues that he has been tackling for years now.
All right, Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for your reporting. We appreciate it.